Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frédéric Filloux. I'm a French journalist, and the point of view I'm going to deliver you this afternoon is going to be the point of view of a journalist. I do not pretend what I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not a computer science. I'm neither an engineer. I try to work to surround myself with people expert in the field. I will be presenting together with this student's Eonseo Jo. She will introduce herself in the middle of the presentation. So let me give you first an overview. My project is called Deepnews.ai. The original name was News Quality Scoring, but no one was able to remember this name, so I decided to go for a more straightforward name. We'd like to solve actually two problems. The first one is a massive undervaluation in quality journalism. I'm going to develop this aspect in a moment. The second one is what I called an untapped potential for new editorial product. This is the two things we would like to unlock. The first question I'm having when I'm doing this kind of presentation, which is a perfectly legitimate question, is how do you define quality? I decided to narrow down the definition of quality to the amount of resources that are deployed by a media organization to cover the news and to differentiate its coverage from other organizations. We are talking value-added versus commodity news. We are talking about workforce. We are talking about talent, expertise, innovation, but also ethics and transparency in the process of doing news. So this is the definition. So how Deepnews.ai will work? It's pretty straightforward. Let's say you are a publisher or a news distributor. You present a bunch of URL stories to an API, and it goes to a SaaS platform, and the platform will render a score for each of the story. And this is an important differentiator in the thing, means that a lot of people are addressing the quality of the news concerning the source. We intend to address the quality of the news at the story level. So this is an important differentiator. The idea is to do that at scale, automatically, and using machine learning algorithm. A reliable score makes nearly anything possible in many different ways that could impact very positively the news ecosystem. The first one is advertising. I'm going to develop that in a moment. The second one are improvement on recommendation engine. The third one is personalization. The fourth one is what I call smart curation and aggregation. And the last one is the creation of premium editorial product. Some might be paid for, some might be free, but we're talking about premium editorial product that will be an important component for the economy of the news ecosystem. So let's dive into the advertising first. Today, the news business is in a kind of weird situation. The news business is the only one in which the cost of producing a story is not passed along the consumer. When you buy an iPhone, when you buy a cheap Android phone, you will find the value of the product passed along the chain of the consuming chain towards the customer. In the case of the news business, it doesn't work that way. If you take this blank space on this page, which is, as you see, a page of the Guardian, regardless of the content which is put in this page, whether it is a cheap story, gossip or something which will be put together by a couple of interns, or a super expensive story that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce, required weeks and months of work and editing process and things, the price of the advertising you see here will be exactly the same regardless of the content. So this is a kind of absurdity we need to correct. So how the stuff will work in practice? Again, you're an aggregator or publisher. You have a stream of story. You submit that to the platform. The platform process stories at the individual level, and let's say it renders a score. Then you have the ad server. You need to know how the ad server is working for a news company. Ad server has premium ads and has non-premium ads, which are cheap. The premium ads are usually negotiated directly between the platform and the advertising, the buying system. It involves usually big brands. And the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, are advertisements which are sold automatically through programmatic. And actually, I did not make this up. I mean, this advertisement, which appeared in the New Yorker, sending, needless to say, to a fake news site, was put in the New Yorker automatically, unbeknownst to the New Yorker, obviously. But there is more. If you take this ugly advertising, which, as you can see, it's in French. I captured them. I captured it when I was in Paris last year. Guess where I got it from? Yes, I got it from the New York Times. It just shows you how screwed up is the current system of advertising in this field. You have a brand, which is the New York Times, and I'm a huge fan of the brand. I must have been one of the first, among the first subscribers they had in France. I'm paying for the New York Times, and I do not regret my money, of course. But we have this thing in which the New York Times system, supply chain of advertising, works so poorly that they can allow this kind of advertising. And needless to say, the price for what we call a mega banner, in that case, is extremely inexpensive, for the most valuable piece of digital real estate you can think of in this country and globally. So there is many things to correct in that field. So the whole idea of the deep news system is to have the ad server being able to detect the score of the story and being able to adjust the price of the advertising in accordance to the value and the quality of the surrounding editorial environment. So this is basically the idea. So many people ask me, probably not you guys, but I'm getting this question quite often, why advertising should reward quality? The first reason is that indicators are blinking red. When you look at the condition of advertising currently in the news business, it is worse than before, and it's actually getting worse in terms of revenue per format, level of fraud, which is huge, the viewability, and the invasion of ad blocking. People, especially in the news business, tends to be very complacent with the ad blockers. They tend to say, well, it's not a problem, it's 15, 20%. That's not true. If you take tech-oriented website, or worse, game-oriented website, which is both tech and oriented to the targeted to the young audience, the rate of ad blockers might shoot up 90%. I know some sites who have this problem. So this is a big problem. Second thing, the brand, what is called brand safety is a major issue. We have seen that recently with YouTube. It has been a very big problem. And also, you need to keep in mind that great journalism content calls for great demographic. It is a known factor that a good story, well reported, a series of great articles are going to reach primarily highly educated people, quite often old people, but also affluent people, which is kind of important for the advertising ecosystem. So great content calls for great demographics. Quality content is also good for better innovative ad format. There is this thing, which is kind of a term which is not perfect. It's called native advertising. And native advertising is a kind of editorial product which is labeled and fit for a brand. And this stuff works much better in the surrounding context of a quality editorial. And the other concept is that ROI, which is the return of investment, which is the religious belief in the advertising business, is not everything. You have plenty of brands who does not measure the ROI in a kind of mundane fashion, but are more interested to provide information or to provide some brand awareness or positive image of their product. So the second application for the Deepnews.ai system is recommendation engine. Recommendation engine is, I would say, the lowest hanging fruit in the news business currently. It is the easiest way to increase readers' engagement. It has a direct impact on the P&L. Today, it works as the following. It is extremely crude. You have a text, a page. The system will spot some keywords, and it will go to the archive, and the archive, based on the keyword, will return related stories. Problem is, it sucks terribly. It doesn't work. You have plenty of examples, and I could show you plenty of examples of, let's say you have a story about the resignation of Rex Tillerson. Let's assume that a very inspired journalist is going to do some kind of film movie reference. He's going to say, well, it's like a drama or something. He's going to quote, I don't know, some kind of movie maker or something, a director or something. It is very likely that the engine of recommendation will actually detect the name of the movie, the director, and will serve a story according to this stuff, which has nothing to do with the bulk of the subject. So we need to address this. So there is little or no relevancy. There are lots of false positive, and there are no signals whatsoever of depth or quality. And the worst is this stuff is largely delegated to Outbrain and Taboola. And this is kind of amazing. If you take, for example, a news website, two quality news websites, let's take Bloomberg and let's take Le Monde in France. Le Monde is a major newspaper in France. It's like the New York Times in this country, or the Washington Post or something. And Bloomberg, like it or not, is a very good journalistic outlet. They are polluting constantly all of their story. In the bottom of the story, you will see an Outbrain or Taboola, actually, advertisement for really crappy stuff. And actually, we'll show you later on that in our model, we are using Outbrain and Taboola reference as a bad sample of articles. So these guys are killing their business for the sake of short-term profitability. The way we see it is that in the next system, we will have the deep news platform analyzing first the text, the stream of the text, but also the all archives. These archives and the text, the stream of in the news cycle, will go through the platform. The platform will assign a score, and we will have a precise indicator of the quality of the text. So we will be able to serve stories not based on mere keywords, but based on the real quality of the text. So we'll be able to lift the most qualitative stories from the publisher archives. We'll lift value-added based on value-added instead of keywords. And the dials of the model, the knob of the model will be able to be turned one way or another in order to serve certain purpose. For example, lifting stories of a certain age, lifting story of a certain kind, and so on and so forth. And it will, practically speaking, increase the page views and the session duration, and it could be included in premium subscription. It addresses what is called a zombie syndrome story. This expression is not mine. It has been given to me by a dude named Massimo Russo, who is the editor-in-chief of La Stampa. And I was presenting this stuff, and he said to me, well, it reminds us, after the coup in Turkey years ago, we decided to, of course, they were covering the news as it happened, but they decided to lift from their archive, manually, literally, a very good pricier story, which was written a year earlier by their political analyst, which was a perfect description of what was the policy of Erdogan and everything. And this story alone was able to translate into 100 subscriptions. Of course, 100 subscriptions for La Stampa is not going to change the economic of this newspaper, but if you apply this kind of stuff on a daily basis across all the boards of the publication, it might affect positively the economic of the news business. So the third thing is the personalization, and we are working in a system which is called the Q tag, Q for quality tag concept. Let me try to explain you. Let's assume that we have, this is unfortunately a kind of fictitious example, but I'm pretty sure that there is some kind of idea behind that. Let's assume that we have a network of publishers, large and small. The small part is kind of important in my reasoning. You will have The Economist, you will have the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Globe and Mail, you will have the MIT Technology Review, you will have Vanity Fair, you will have some kind of fictitious future city blog. Now you have the reader, this woman. She subscribed to The Economist. The Economist knows a lot about her because The Economist knows where she comes from, what she reads in The Economist, what kind of story she likes, what kind of subject she likes, what kind of format of story she likes. The story knows this. She likes long forms, she likes profile of people, She's working in urban studies, so she loves urban things. She's a trained economist, so she likes global economy. She likes some kind of science and tech, but she doesn't like politics and sports, which I don't like either, by the way. And so this is what I call the Q tag. The Q tag is the label of this person based on her preference. The way I see it is that in order to be efficient, this Q tag has to be based on some kind of consent way. It means that this woman will have some kind of trusted relationship with The Economist. At some point, The Economist will ask her, okay, The Economist is part of this network. Would you agree, in order to serve you better, that we could share some of your reading information with other publication member of the network? And of course, we guarantee blah, blah, blah privacy thing, but it will be good for serve you better. So if we go this way, we will have the quality tag that will travel along all the publication that this woman will look at across this network. Large publications such as the Toronto Globe and Mail, but also specialized publications such as the MIT Technology Review, but also tiny stuff such as the Future City blog and so on. So the thing is, when she will read the MIT Technology Review, the Technology Review will come with its article and everything, but also it will be able to serve recommended stories, quality stories, based on the profile and preference expressed by this woman through her readers, her reading of The Economist, and it will warrant that she will be served with super relevant stuff. So you might ask me, what's in it for The Economist? For The Economist, the whole system will work as some kind of reciprocity. The Economist will serve also relevant stories from other publications. And once she will be reading the fictitious Future City blog, she will have also recommended story based on her preferences of genre, of type of article and topic. This could be a super virtuous system, way more better than the current Outbrain and Taboola. Last thing is what I call smart curation and aggregation. Again, let me take an example. Let me take the example of The Guardian, who happens to be a partner of our venture. The editor of The Guardian asks every desk of The Guardian, such as the international economy, science, etc., to come up with the whole list of website and online publication that the journalists are monitoring on a daily basis. Let's talk about, we are talking about 500 websites producing thousands of articles per day. It is a super qualitative selection of websites provided by specialized journalists, but it's not possible to monitor this output every day. And problem is, this great output is not seen by the reader. So let's assume the following. We have this 500 website, thousands of articles per day. Again, it will go through the Deep News platform, and we will extract for this story, we'll scrape the content, extract the most relevant based on their value-added quality and so on. And we will be able to repackage this thing in some kind of premium product for the benefit of the reader, for instance, in newsletter that could be paid for newsletters of super high quality, high relevant stuff. So the whole system benefits the news ecosystem across the board. New product opportunities, increase of the destination notion dimension of news website, which has been largely escaped to the benefit of other players. I mean, the problem is with news site right now, they are no longer destination websites. There is no more leakage to other players like aggregators, curators, and stuff. There will be more time spent by the reader, a deeper engagement, more loyalty, and last but not the least, more revenue. So how we intend to build it? We are actually working on two models. The first one is the feature-based model, relying on signals. I'm going to develop that. It's done by my team in Paris. And the second one is deep learning-based. It's done here at Stanford at the CS230 class by a group of students. So very quickly, the feature-based model, it relies on a list of signals that we put together in which we will have, for instance, an analysis of the bylines. The bylines is super important stuff when you think about it. The byline will tell you could tell you about the notoriety of the journalist. It could tell you, for instance, how important the byline is for the publisher. If behind the byline you have a link that sends the reader to the whole body of work of the journalist, sends the reader to the biography of the journalist, it means that there is a will for transparency and qualitative assessment of the author of the article. So we're going to look at the photo, for instance, the use of the photo, the use of the video, does it use stock footage, does it credit properly the photography and stuff. Then we're going to do some kind of text analysis. The word count is the most obvious, but it's not by far the only, the main signals. Name entity, the number of name entities is kind of important. A quote analysis, the number of people quoted. We're going to do a series of reading ease assessment. And we're going to look at the structure, including sometimes the punctuation structure. That's going to be what I call quantifiable signals. In order to be complete, we are also going to rely on signals that cannot be, or at least at a large scale, retrieved by a machine. We call that subjective signals, and that was the initial list. We have story type, writing, thoroughness, balance and fairness, etc., etc. We decided to test this through some kind of dedicated interface that will be put online online in a few days. This is the prototype right now. So people make an evaluation of a story, they pick up a story, they make an evaluation of the different components, and they give a global score. And the signals we are asking for has been narrowed down to the story type, the thoroughness, the balance and fairness, the lifespan, which is a very important factor of the lifespan, and what I call the importance and relevance, and again, the global score. And then we have the deep learning natural language processing, and I turn to Eun-Seo Jo, who is going to deliver you the state of the art.
Talk about noises, since you talk about signals.
Noises like what?
Bad stuff.
Yeah, bad stuff. Well,
that you want to recheck, basically.
Yeah, I mean the whole idea.
That might be even more important.
Yeah. The whole idea is actually to reject the bad stuff. So Eun-Seo.
So my teammates and I were given this wonderful opportunity to work with Frédéric and his news quality scoring project through a class we're taking. And these are my teammates. This is actually still at a very early stage, and it's very experimental. And I almost want to temper your expectations by saying we don't quite have major results yet. But we wanted to share some of the techniques and approaches that we have been experimenting with. So before we delve into the technical details of our models, we as a team sort of stood back and asked, what is quality news? What do we want our model to classify as high or low quality news? And we broke down this nebulous idea into sort of concrete dimensions that range from finer and broader, from finer to broader definitions. And on the sort of the finer end, we have more easily quantifiable things such as the structure of a sentence, the writing eloquence and conciseness, even the density of information. But we have on the broader spectrum, narrative arc, various scopes, themes, and theses, if present at all, and what journalists call an angle. And these we all hoped, we worked with the assumption that our deep learning model would be able to capture some of these qualities of quality news. So as with all supervised learning tasks, we were faced with this big problem of human labeled data. And we calculated that each news article costs about $1 for human reading labels. And given we were working, or we're hoping to work eventually with 4 million articles, our budget could not handle human labeling of our entire data set. So instead, what we did is rely on the reputation of the news providers. So for instance, The Economist has a great reputation for producing consistently high quality news articles. And so we labeled all articles coming out of The Economist as high quality. And for professional purposes, I will not go into which brands we've classified as producing low quality news. But this is just a small selection of... but our model will tell us. So this is a small selection of some of the news providers that we're working with. And we're still currently in the process of collecting and labeling our data. We eventually hope to have more than even 4 million. And we actually are in the process of working with human labeled data as well, just a smaller set, not 4 million. And in this process, we found that there are several caveats. And the biggest caveat, especially when working with deep learning with this data set, is that because we are working with the assumption that well-reputed news providers would produce good quality news, that means that, in effect, our models are trained to learn how to classify based on the house styles of the different news providers. In other words, if an unlabeled news article comes in and it's written in the form of The Economist, maybe it's a former Economist writer, then it would be classified as high quality. And in a way, that's sort of what we want. But there's other problems with that. And one is that we have the problem of topical bias, because some of these news providers tend to discuss topics that are, for instance, heavy on business or finance, so The Economist, for instance, or the Financial Times. And this means that when you have an unlabeled article coming in talking about economics or business, it would be highly rated towards high quality because of the presence of certain topical words. And then we also had the other problem of working with it's not really historical, because I'm actually a historian, and history means, like at least 20 years back. But so there's sort of the temporal bias, because our data set is from the past, and because of the nature of news is that news is contemporaneous. And so if our data set of The Economist comes from 10 years ago, then topics from 10 years ago would be present in the topical words. And so what we did is we wanted to completely eliminate topical bias by replacing them with part-of-speech tags. And here we were inspired by works in stylometry, and there's a huge emphasis on function words or stop words such as is, the, a, and how they are used together in sentences, and punctuation. So we kept function words, part-of-speech tags, and punctuation. We replaced all topical words. So this is an article from The Economist. As expected, it's an economic topic. We take the text and then we convert it into this format, and this is exactly the text that goes into our models. And so in order to test whether this was a good idea to tag out, to mask out a big chunk of our data, we decided to very quickly test it in a feed-forward network. And this is, I'm sure you're all very familiar with this network. This is an affine network where all the neurons are connected to the next layer. So the procedure is just very standard continuous bag of words model, where we take the tokens, and for each token, we take the corresponding pre-trained word embeddings, and then we take the average element-wise and feed it into our affine network with a binary prediction at the very end. These are some of the preliminary results we got. And as you can see, it's actually quite promising. One, because you can see that our accuracy is quite high. And it's not perfect, but it is a baseline. We're not learning even the structure of sentences at this point. And what's interesting is that you can see that the POS tag dev test set starts to overperform the raw text, which is interesting and what we expected, because it's serving as sort of a regulator so that it's not biased against some of the topics that appear. And then the next, and from here, we're still working on this, and we have these models planned, and we are experimenting, and we are currently training language models right now. But this is the next obvious step, which is to use a sequence model, very commonly used in NLP for their ability to learn sentence structures. And so a sequence model, takes in at every time step the next word embedding. And then here we just have a very simple an acceptor model, where we make a binary classification at the very end. Is it a good or high or low quality news? And then here we're working with a language model. A language model is, again, a sequence model, but the difference is that at every time step, we're making a prediction of the next word. And we're training because the language model is not designed to be actually a classifier. We've made some arrangements so that it's able to classify in the end. And so here we have two separate language models. The first language model is trained solely on commodity news, and the second model is trained solely on quality news. So we're almost purposefully biasing the model so that the two models are learning, are training weights that are very high or very low quality. And so that's our first stage of training. And then in our second stage of training, what we're doing is we introduce actually a discriminator model, which is an actual model that makes a binary prediction. And the input for this discriminator model is actually the output from the feed forward stage of the two language models. And specifically, we're taking the softmax probability of the next time step, the t+1 time step, at every time step, so that at the end of the iteration, we have a 1 by t vector from the two language models, and we feed that in into our discriminator, so that the discriminator is learning to make the binary prediction. And so we still have other works in progress. This includes comparing our results, our deep learning results, with more traditional machine learning methods, such as the SVM with bigram inputs, which has shown to be very powerful in text classification methods. And we also we're still working with human labeled data, which is a matter of economics, so that we can finally reduce our reliance on news provider reputation. And these are our sponsors. And thank you for your attention.
Stay here, because you might have some technical question I won't be able to answer. If you have question, that's the right moment. Thank you for your attention.
So, sir? Yeah, I'm curious on one thing. So on some smaller news publications, like even San Jose Mercury News, I've noticed has done this. A certain proportion of their content will just be pulled from sources like Associated Press. So the content in that case is largely going to be the same from publication to publication, modulo the edits that each publication might do before posting it as their content. I'm kind of curious how that impacts things, since it's almost identical content between publications. Like, is that something that in these models would be like no advertising, or negative quality, or positive quality, or what?
First of all, that is exactly why we are approaching the problem at the article level, because in the same edition, or in the same 24 hours of publication for the San Jose Mercury News, you might have shallow articles. We call that commodity news, which is totally different from fake news. Let me insist on this. It might be simply a story that just happened. The reporter doesn't have the time to do his or her job, and they're going to produce an article that will be fairly shallow. So when it comes to the news agency, first of all, we can say that we just inject not in the model yet, but in the research we are doing, we just inject 800,000 articles from Reuters that will be analyzed by itself. And it's interesting because for two things. The first one is that newswire dispatches articles are written in the same way. They are built on the same kind of structure, and they tend to be fairly reliable. Edited, very thorough editing process and stuff. So yes, you might have the same story appearing in several newspapers. That's the thing, but it won't affect the model, because we want to be able to detect the story that requires a very great journalistic work. typically in the case of the San Jose Mercury News, you might have an in-depth story which is going to be an investigative piece about, I don't know, land zoning in Silicon Valley next to a shallow article about something. And our model will be willing to detect and to assign a different score from 1 to 5, we hope, being able to differentiate the shallow story to the in-depth story. That is the goal. Sir?
How do you differentiate between a shallow or a quick story on a really important topic versus a really in-depth story on a topic which really is not important?
Yeah. I mean, feel free to interject, by the way, because I don't want to monopolize that is the big problem. How could I put it? The differentiation. This is exactly what we want. Again, what we want to work at the article level, not at the story level, and this makes the problem of labeling story quite crucial. And actually, one of the next steps we will have access to. It was not the case, unfortunately, for building the current model the students are working on, but we will have access to 10,000 stories that will have been labeled by a third-party company. They will have analyzed, for instance, the time of engagement for each story, the depth. They will put a pixel, for instance, in the page to be able to see if the readers actually go to the bottom of the story or do they remain at the top of the story. So that will be an indicator. One of the indicators will be the length of a story. Other indicators will be quotes. American journalism rely a lot on quotes. So we might be able to differentiate the story by the density and actually the volume of information that are in a story. But our goal is very clear. We want to be able, when the Huffington Post, for instance, which is mostly a fairly shallow news provider, and to be frank, we put that in the category of shallow news provider. Sometimes the Huffington Post. Huffington Post, yeah. The whole idea is to be able to detect if the Huffington Post is actually running an in-depth stories. It is even more important for very tiny website. The goal of this model, I don't think we will be able to achieve that in the near future, but the ultimate goal of the model is being able to detect the quality of a small blog. I always take the example, I have a blog which is called the Monday Note, in which one of my colleagues, his name is Jean-Louis Gasset, he unearthed an amazing blog. The guy is written by some retired engineer in Seattle. The guy is highly specialized in metallurgy and the way that iPhones, for instance, are manufactured and stuff. The guy was able to write a series of amazing stories based on his knowledge of the way that pieces of aluminum are actually milled and so on. These are unique pieces, and this is exactly the kind of pieces I'd like our stuff to be able to detect and to lift. Quality pieces, even though the supplier, I mean the output of this guy working probably alone is fairly small. Andy, you had a question?
Yeah, I want to sort of understand newspaper publishers, because I think that's sort of key to, at least that's what I don't know. You say that they choose between Outbrain and Tabula. On what basis did they choose between them, and why aren't they evaluating alternatives, or are they happy?
It is actually very straightforward. I mean, the choice of these two, you have three, Outbrain, Tabula, and another one is called Rev Content. And we actually analyze 1 million stories coming from these guys. It is very straightforward. These three companies are actually paying the publisher upfront with a very high minimum guarantee to have this story displayed. The problem is, it is a completely perverse system, because the problem is not only Outbrain or Tabula are getting paid by other kind of small publisher they are going to aggregate, but they are going to get paid because they are going to aggregate all the reading data coming from the main publisher. for instance, Bloomberg, for instance, Le Monde, for instance, plenty of others like Business Insider and stuff, and they're going to resell the data. So the publisher is screwed twice. First of all, it is totally disfiguring its content by undermining the credibility. I mean, when you think about it, it is completely absurd. You will have a piece written by a bunch of journalists who will have spent many hours working on their stuff, and at the bottom of it, you will have a story which will say, learn Russian in 3 weeks, or the celebrities, blah, 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 and so on. To me, it's a kind of insult to journalists. That's why, by the way, the New York Times was one of the very few to actually refuse that. And the newsroom actually refused to have this kind of stuff displayed. It's purely a question of money. So they are disfiguring their pages, and they are leaking data to other stuff. And as you know, data is a super important thing. Sir?
I'm wondering what kind of signals advertisers currently get, like certainly from Facebook and Google and other parties. They'll get information about the target of the advertiser that have been classified by Facebook or Google, and they use that in figuring out how much to bid. How much information do they get about the site where it's actually going to appear? And could a publisher say, well, this was an expensive article for us, so if you want to place an article here, then two, we're going to ask Google about the quality of the ad, because Google ranks the quality of ads.
Google ranks
and we'll make you pay more.
First of all, advertisers, they have tons of data about the quality of the surrounding stuff.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. They get that because they are able to conduct the same kind of analysis than we do, and they like to have an idea of what is around the advertising. The problem is they don't want to use it very much right now. So in theory, they could be able to.
So do they bid more if they think it's a good
No,
placement?
they don't bid more. But the thing is, I wouldn't have started this project if I hadn't have clear signals from the advertising community, then actually they would be interested in by this kind of stuff. The ability to score stories at the individual level, at the story level. And actually, when you, for instance, I got a cold call because they reached out to me from Group M, which is the media buying entity for WPP in London, which is the largest media buyer in the world.
Right.
And I don't know if you have seen the news recently. WPP has released some super bad result with a drop in their revenue and drop in their profitability. Yeah, that's a very big tremor in the.
What happened to them?
Oh, it's simply because the platforms are eating their lunch. And the guy I talked to is say to me that actually they might be interested to talk with us about quality, because they believe that it could be some kind of credible refuge or credible way to actually lift the unitary value of the advertising module. So there is definitely something here. My problem is that I'm more a journalist than an advertising guy, and I would be more willing to work with publisher than advertiser. But since I'm also a pragmatist and I need money to pay for smart engineers, I would probably try to sell my stuff to advertiser. Sir, and then you. Sorry.
Okay. Just a suggestion for how you might be able to historically rank the quality of news articles. Usually the truth comes out some period of time later. In the case of Dewey beats Truman, it was maybe 24 hours later. In the case of, I don't know, the Pentagon Papers or something, it might be years later. If your system could take an article and look at the subsequent article, a year or two later, and could recognize whether what he said was true in the light of history, then you could get some scoring, some true scoring as to whether this source really knew what he was doing.
Well, nothing else, just count sites.
Yeah, although not hits.
Sites.
Sites, yeah.
Yeah, count sites.
Yeah, I mean, that could be an indicator. That's why one of the very important indicator we are looking for is the lifespan of a story. You have stories which have a value of a few hours, some few days, some weeks, some months, and some are what we call evergreen. What we are referring to is the evergreen story, the ability to measure evergreen story. But the whole thing would like to be able to achieve is being able to detect the characteristic of an evergreen story right from the outset. Just to give you an idea, we are with another student is working alone with another student working in a kind of different data set. The guy, but on the same kind of reasoning we are working on, the guy decided to go to take all the Pulitzer Prize story, which will be a kind of gold standard of quality journalist, and he wants to extract all the quality, all the features, all the hidden features of Pulitzer Prize, which I think is an interesting idea. There is no commercial application to it, but I think it's an interesting lead, and we intend to work with him. Sir?
It's called authorship detection. There's a long history on that.
Authorship.
Who wrote it? Like in the Bible, who wrote what?
Yeah, except that sometimes, I mean...
Constitution, Hamilton, Madison.
Yeah.
Who copied from whom?
Yeah, but the authorship, sometimes, I mean, an evergreen story, a story that will have a real impact, might be written by some kind of unknown person. So, I mean, the notion...
But you can tell if it's the same author, the same unknown green, whatever.
Yeah.
And how would you recognize the Watergate break-in as a seminal story when it first came out? That really seems hard.
That's an interesting story. Honestly, we don't. I mean, if I'm completely, truly honest with you, we don't. What we really, I don't know what you think about this, but what we might be able to detect is a kind of pattern in the follow-up stories. So we might be able to detect the fact that this story is gaining in importance because the Washington Post, in that case, is devoting a greater efforts to actually report the stories on a kind of regular basis, assigning more people, talking to lots of people around this story. And I think, I don't know what you think, but I think we might be able to detect low-level signals, low-level signals for this kind of thing.
Well, I think the topic of veracity is very interesting because in terms of history, I think that they're actually, if we're talking about primary sources, written 20 years ago, or the Watergate, I think that an article that is quality may not. It could. Maybe it's not making the right claims at the time of its publication, but I think it could still be quality news because it could still be a quality primary source. Because I think a quality piece of writing would not make outrageous claims that this is exactly true, and it would be shown through in the style of writing.
This gentleman was willing to ask a question.
Could you say a little bit more about what you're trying to accomplish with feeding the text where you remove the topics and just have the part of speech tags and the function words into a neural network? What are you hoping to accomplish with that?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we're eliminating so much original data by masking them out with POS tags is because we have sort of a big bias in our data set. So I mentioned to you, we have first, because we don't have human labeled data, we have the problem of relying on the quality of the news providers. And we're heavily skewed towards news providers that talk about business and finance topics. And so we don't want to make the mistake of incoming test articles that happen to talk about business and finance to be labeled quality just because they have certain topical words with high frequency. And then there's a second, which is that because news is instantaneous, it's supposed to be reporting what happened very recently. Our data set timelines are not exactly aligned for all the news providers that we work with. So I think for The Economist, we have the last 10 years. And then for, I think, the Google dump, it's the last 15 years or something like that. And so we have this problem of certain topics that arise, with high frequency 15 years ago. And then we have different topics that arise with high frequency 10 years ago, right? So we want to eliminate the temporal and news provider reputation bias, or topical bias.
I'm just thinking that this might be capturing more of a style of writing, like it might both Hemingway and
Right, yeah,
Faulkner
so
are
it's
good
closer,
writers.
yeah,
but-
so it's heavily inspired by stylometry and authorship attribution. And so we're hoping that because we have a wide variety of writers and source providers, that we would be capturing general quality writing style rather than Hamilton writing for New York Times or something.
Or at least we get better articles about the Kardashians.
Right, yeah.
Because you just run, if I want to get more hits on my Kardashian out of you, I just go do the same analysis and then do bad libs.
Right. Well, I mean, you could have an article about the Kardashians that is quality. I don't think that all articles that talk about the Kardashians could be.
Do you have an existence proof of that?
Back to publishers' motivations. Q tags. Have you talked to the Washington Post and pick somebody else and ask them the question, will you share data about your viewers, your readers with someone else in return for information about their readers?
Actually, that's a good question. At this very moment, none of them will. Because for a couple of reasons. The first one is, and I was quite involved in France and in Europe in some kind of collective initiative when it comes to try to put publishers together and having them to share stuff. This is not an industry which is willing to share, which is kind of weird to me. I'm from Europe, in which you have the cell phone companies, cell phone carriers, which are fined quite often for collusion on price and stuff like that. None of this stuff is happening in the news publishing business. These people are not willing to share their stuff. Having said that, first of all, I'm kind of maybe too optimistic. I tend to believe that if we are able to show them the benefit of sharing some of the data in some kind of close, trusted environment of the fictitious network of I was referring to, I think this kind of stuff could work. If you take quality publication like the one I was mentioning in my hypothetical example, I think if you are able to create some kind of fairly small network of high quality publication which will be vetted one against each other, then these people might be willing to share some of the data, because I mean it will be fairly easy to show them that if for the MIT Technology Review we are able to show some kind of readers is coming, the Alice, the lady fictitious, coming to look at the MIT Technology Review, and she sees some stories from other publications, we might be able to tell to the member of the network that there is indeed a benefit. Because we can go a bit further. I mean, I've been giving a lot of thinking on this. Let's assume for just a second that the MIT Technology Review has a paywall, which is quite assumable. They are paid for, but they don't have a paywall, a metal paywall. Let's say that you have, for instance, I don't know, three articles per month that are free, and then you need to pay. If they see this person coming, this person is some kind of occasional reader, but she is definitely interested in something, which is urban studies and so on and so forth, that the MIT Technology Review is covering from time to time. I think it will be wise for the MIT Technology Review to open just a little bit the paywall in order to say to this occasional customer, hey, okay, you seem to be interested, so let's give you a trial offer for 2 months and you will see the inside of the store and stuff. That's the first thing they should be very well advised to do. The second thing is pricing. I don't believe that everybody is willing to pay the same price for the same service. If we take this, again, fictitious female reader, she might be willing, let's assume that the price of the MIT Technology Review is $15 a month. This person, she reads sometimes a story, I mean, maybe once a month in the Technology Review. She might not be willing to pay $15 a month because, I mean, the value is simply not there. If, after having seen the behavior of this person, the MIT Technology Review is able to determine patterns of consumption and make some kind of assessment on how much she might actually be willing to pay, they might be coming to the conclusion that the best deal for this person will be $4.99 a month, which is better than nothing. And this is my view of the paywall system, but unfortunately we are very far from it. And Andy, to come back to your question, how to convince publishers that they should go to this kind of model is precisely to build models in which they will see the benefit of having some, in the example I was taking about the MIT review, a long tail of brand new subscribers they don't have access to that might be willing to pay between $4 and $9 per month, which is again way better than nothing. Sir.
So one thing mentioning about the Q tag is, I'm kind of wondering if you've been talking to publishers. Yes, that's important. I'm kind of wondering also if you've been talking to Apple, because the way everything that I read about every new iOS, in particular Safari version, becoming stricter and stricter on clearing out third-party cookies for websites. If Q tags are implemented in such a way, even if a person is interested in it, they might not be able to use it.
True. It will be the same case in Europe with the GDPR thing that will restrict the
Yeah, but if something becomes big enough and Apple decides to block it, then it becomes a cat and mouse game.
True.
Is the problem.
The plain answer I have to this is that's why I insist on the fact that this tag has to be consent based. I mean, I am the subscriber to the Toronto Globe and Mail. I have a kind of trusted relationship, and if the Toronto Globe and Mail asks me, would you might accept to share some information? Would you be okay if we share some information about your reading patterns in order to serve you better in some kind of content and trusted environment? Me, even though I'm kind of a suspicious guy, I will tend to say yes. I might be wrong, but I think it's quite of a possibility, because again, we might be able to. So as long as this stuff is respected, i.e., consent-based cookie, so to speak, tag, I think it could work. By the way, the same problem applies to the regulation that will be implemented next May in Europe, which is called the GDPR or something, which is going to be a super big problem for the publisher. So you had a question?
Yes. I currently read from 15 different websites that have paywalls, and it's just too much trouble to set up 15 different accounts to pay them. So instead, I use all the trickery I know to get around the paywalls. I pay them nothing, and I use an ad blocker.
Okay.
This is their business model.
We are recording this, right?
Wait till after. Many people do, and it's a big problem. But you know what? I mean, I assume that if you take, I can see what kind of publication you might be reading, and I doubt that you might be willing to pay the full. Maybe I'm wrong, but I doubt that you might be willing to pay the full price for each of the publication, because it will cost you a bundle in the end.
Oh yeah. So it's a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So if they had some kind of publication service where I could sort of pay one fee, and depending on my usage, and it wasn't too much, I'd be willing to do that. But 15 of them, forget it.
Yeah, 15 at an average of $9 or $12 a publication is going to.
And just the overhead of trying to maintain the 15 different subscriptions.
I don't think maintaining the account is a problem. I think that at some point the chunk that it will take to your discretionary revenue, the money you are willing to spend in this kind of thing, will be a problem, because in the end it might cost you a fairly big amount of money each year, and you might not see the value for a publication that you look at a couple of times in the month. Mm-hmm. And if they ask you $15, you say no. But if they ask you $5, you might say, oh, $5. It's the price of an espresso at Stanford. So, so sir, and then you, sir.
Thinking along the same lines as my thoughts too. I try and figure out how to get around a paywall or something like that. But what drives me nuts is, why can't I pay something for a single use or a double use or something? Why do they want to force me into a subscription thing? that I'll immediately want to ignore the subscription thing and go for a one-time use with a one-time password or something.
The question of the one-time use, you mean by that the fact that, for instance, paying article by the piece?
Second?
Do you mean by, for instance, paying article by the piece?
Yes,
For instance, paying, I don't know, 5 cents an article and stuff. I must say that as a former executive in publishing companies, I'm rather against the idea of unbundling a news content, because when you look at the math, it doesn't add up for the publisher. It is one of the best way to actually kill the business, because the unitary price, even multiplied by certain patterns of consumption, will never replace the $10 a month subscription in terms of direct income from the publication. So it could be kind of tricky.
I used to go to the library, open up a newspaper, and then use the copy machine.
Yeah, that's another thing. But
They don't do that anymore.
No.
But that's the model I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
But we can do that with screen, making screenshots,
You make
and
screenshots.
passing
Yeah, you
it on
can-
to your friends.
Oh well, if someone is extremely poor, he or she can find a super easy way. If someone has the time, they can find all sorts of way to look at news for free. I mean,
Right.
you will have 4 browsers on your computer.
Yeah.
Might have 2 computers. You might have 2 mobile devices.
Yep.
I mean, no problem of
And
paying,
anyway,
except for hard paywalls such as the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. But you will miss some stories. But I mean, when you consider the value of a story and the replicability of a story over time,
Somebody else will soon pick up that story.
Exactly,
Wait
that's what I
today, and you'll get it anyway.
Yeah, you will
just
give-
Google it. They often have others
you know
have it for free anyway.
Yeah, what
Just
we
take
pay.
you longer to find it.
My take is what we pay in a subscription to a news service. We pay convenience.
Yeah.
We pay quick, fast access. We pay, okay, I look at the Washington Post every morning on my tablet. I don't want to be bothered by juggling into my different browser and stuff. I have half an hour to pour over the 3 main outlets I'd like to have a look at, and I pay for that convenience. But if money becomes scarce, I will reconsider. So, you got a question?
I don't understand why this has to be done with machine learning or artificial intelligence. We've had product reviews and movie reviews, for example, done by humans for quite a while. And some of them are crowdsourced and some of them are paid professional reviews. And I, for one, would be perfectly willing to spend a certain amount per year to have a sort of review next to the articles in the magazines or the newspapers online, saying that the Associated Editors of America rank the accuracy of this story and the relevance and whatever. Just a couple of simple scalers, and that would give me a clue as to whether a body of people that I trust, or at least that I respect, had a favorable or unfavorable opinion about this article. So it doesn't have to be done by machine, to my point.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Some robo and some people.
Yeah, you could have
And
red
you
state
sub-
versions and blue
And
state
and
versions.
you subscribe to the ones you believe in, and it shows those.
Yeah,
And other people subscribe to different ones.
and I would actually spend a few dollars for that service.
That almost argues for a Netflix model. Instead of having publish everywhere, everybody publish in the same place, but then you get a real recommendation engine, not this crap recommendation engine. Because then the attention is being mediated by somebody who actually cares to keep you happy.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, Andy, because in my blog I keep constantly referring to Netflix, which is, in my view, the operating system of the video market in this country and abroad, of course. And I think we have a lot of stuff to draw from the inspiration of Netflix. Actually, Netflix, when it comes to the biggest problem we have, which is the labeling the data, Netflix is doing a lot of data labeling by hand.
Yeah.
They have thousands, literally thousands of genres of film, and they have actually humans who are paid, kind of super paid couch potato people who actually watch movie and say, okay, it is a story of an old guy with a mustache living in the 19th century, falling in love with an Indian woman, and so on and so forth. A super granular kind of thing. And it is definitely part of the Netflix recommendation engine. Just a funny statistic I unearthed a few years ago. Just to give you an idea of the amount of money that Netflix has poured in its recommendation engine. A few years ago, I was used to be the digital guy, head of digital operation for the major business news provider in France. It's called Les Echos. And it turns out that at this time, the revenue of this newspaper and the payroll, the staff of this newspaper was exactly the same than the budget of Netflix recommendation engine and the number of people which were employed by Netflix recommendation engine. In that case, 300 people for a budget of $150 million, plus or minus the conversion in euros. But roughly the same figures. It just gives you an idea how much this guy at Netflix has been visionary when it comes to say, okay, we have this huge library of stuff. On the long run, we are going to produce a whole bunch of content because Netflix is going to invest $8 billion and is scheduled to produce 800 pieces of new Netflix original this very year. So they decided that taking the long view, they say, well, we are going to need to label this kind of stuff and in order to be able to exploit it later on. That's why, I mean, and Eunse has been quite convincing because she keeps yelling at me that the data are not clean, they are not labeled and stuff. But of course, she is absolutely right with that. And one of the assets we are, I think, creating right now, and it is my short-term objective, is to be able to take the millions of articles we have and finding ways to label most of them in a most granular fashion. This is one of the goals because after that we will be able to come up with a lot of different kind of model and flavor of machine learning and deep learning things. Sir?
You know, there's an interesting parallel in scholarly communication where there's new roles of curation are becoming mandated on top of research for sharing research, repeatability, all this kind of stuff. And it's about quality. It's about quality of scholarly communication. And so as more and more things are being generated and nobody can read it all, they need to have machines and people that are in this curation role. And I've seen some funding proposals with the EU where they require you to have as so many curators as the people generating the content, right? And I think that what you're talking about in Netflix is a different kind of content, but they have an active curation role there. And maybe there's some role for providing tools for curators who can annotate the content in a way that helps make it more findable, more searchable, more relevant, that kind of stuff. Adding knowledge to the news based on machines or people. This is just something to think about.
Yeah, actually, I think one of the thing we want to do is having machine and people working hand to hand. The last thing I want to develop, although I'm very passionate with technology and I enjoy very much having conversation with people like NCO about a deep learning model. The last thing I want is building a stuff that will be totally extraneous from a human approach. You need to consider, however, one thing, which is currently nearly every day a channel like the biggest of all, Facebook, is dealing with 100 million links per day. Half of them are in English, roughly speaking. This is a figure which has been confirmed to me by Feedly. I'm sure many of you use Feedly. And the guy at Feedly, they build an infrastructure which is able to deal with 100 million links, half of them in English. It means that at some point, we need to rely on machine in order to do some kind of testing, analysis, and stuff, because simply the pipe is too big. This is the issue I'm having with fact-checking. I'm an old guy, I'm an old journalist, and I've been bathed in my career with facts and so on and so forth. I was lucky enough to work for an absolutely great publication in which facts were sacred. So I know quite a bit about this thing. The fact of the matter is, sorry for the pun, but the fact of the matter is that fact-checking is great, it's necessary, it is extremely well done, especially in this country. But the fact of the matter is fact-checking is a tiny drop in the vast ocean. I used to say that it's like pretending purifying the Ganges River one glass at a time. Picking up a glass saying, oh, I'm going to clean up this glass, oh, it's super clean right now, and ignoring the square meter, thousands, square cube meters going through this
Turn
thing.
the mic off now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, well, we have a tradition of turning off the mics, so things hanging from the
Sure,
ceiling,
okay,
not
cool.
mics, and then you tell the truth.
Okay, so well, I did not refrain myself, but
Nothing but the truth.
nothing but the truth. Thank you.